So, Princess Eugenie, out of all people, is at Davos lecturing the public on how climate change is related to modern slavery.
49 million people estimated in slavery today, and we know that when the climate is vulnerable, the most vulnerable people are affected by it, and that we're going to see that more and more. Each time there's a crisis happening, that people are going to be vulnerable and taken into difficult situations.
Well, Jess, last year she launched an anti-slavery podcast, but I haven't heard anything about it since. So this is the first time she's ever, done an interview of this sort for Reuters, which is an international news agency. It's a pretty big audience, but I'm not convinced that the podcast went anywhere because, frankly, Jess, I'm not sure who would want to sit and listen to Princess Eugenie talking about tackling modern day slavery. I imagine someone sitting through a podcast series on that topic from her would switch off pretty quickly. But clearly, this is of the mold of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, of activists trying to get into the podcast game, a lucrative game if you can pull it off. But it is funny, isn't it? The optics of a princess in Davos, right? Which I'm assuming, as such a committed disciple, by the way, Jess, of the climate cultists, that she actually either cycled or she didn't fly to get there, right? And I would actually say to her, should you really be doing these kinds of interviews? I mean, look at how that went for your dad, right? He thought he'd had a fantastic interview, the Duke of York, Prince Andrew, with the BBC. He sat there proud as punch to BBC Newsnight. And look at what that did for him. It was a complete disaster for him and for the royal family. Now, I actually think what's going on here, consider the fact, Jess, that Prince Andrew's kids were the only royals to actually appear in the Meghan and Harry documentary, which for my sins I've actually seen. And they're the only two that are vocally committed, sympathetic to the climate cult in all of its, shapes and forms, given interviews like this one about how climate change is linked to modern slavery. I mean, Jess, when she was actually asked to elaborate on that, she just ummed some yahs and, ummed and ahed and couldn't really answer the question. So for me, it boils down to this fundamental point. I would consider myself to be a monarchist, right? And I would also, with that said, urge caution for any royal wanting to go down this route. Because actually, if you are trying to get in with praising Saint Greta and others, and you're elbowing your way to becoming an activist royal voice, there lies, in my view, the destruction of the entire institution. Because if you, as a royal, are at the centre or are at the forefront of this activism, the activism that's going to lead to us being colder and poorer, and you're doing it, Jess, around the moneyed elites at the World Economic Forum in Davos, who are undoubtedly making vast sums of cash that's sloshing around this net zero straitjacket that governments across the West have tied us all into, then as a working class man or woman in Britain, you're going to be looking at them and thinking, well, I'm too afraid to put the heating on. I'm too afraid of filling up the tank in my car. The government might be about to put up fuel duty. The weekly shop is becoming unaffordable. There is no coherent response to a straightforward question from these royals about how climate change is linked to modern slavery. And you just look at all of this and you must conclude, if you are becoming the champion of making us both colder and poorer, then you set yourself on a path of politicisation and you actually risk placing the institution itself at risk. So I do say, why can't these pampered princesses just shut up, right? Just shush. It's as simple as that, because I really do fear that they risk the politicisation and ruin of that cherished institution.
So we have seen an increase in activist royals recently, for example, with King Charles's coronation, of refugees welcome, for example, and his whole stick off climate change activism as well. Why do you think this is, and why, do you think it's making it harder to be a royalist?
Yeah, I do actually. I do think it is. I mean, monarchy is supposed to sit above the dirty business of politics, right? Monarchy is the magic of the constitution binding together all of the parts of our unwritten constitution. And when you've got, Princess Eugenie saying that her son August, who by the way is younger than 2 years old, Jess, she declared he's going to be an activist from the age of 2. Why would you want to politicize your child, royal or not? Why would you actually want your child to believe that the world is going to burn in a ball of flames, or that your child is going to drown to death in his own lifetime because of apocalyptic climate change, or that there's going to be a vast swathe of migration to this country and overflood of people coming here because of the world becoming immersed in water or fire? It's just, I don't know why you would do that to your child. I don't know why you wouldn't look at the whole raft of evidence throughout the last, whether that be going back to the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you name it. There have been reports suggesting that the end is nigh, right? That's it. Humanity's had its lot. We're all going to die. And it doesn't happen. I actually have confidence. I have faith in humanity that actually we can come up with some ingenious solution to actually tackle this based around, private investment, all these other things. Who knows, Jess? Maybe Elon Musk is going to get us to Mars and we'll all live happily ever after there. But I just don't understand why you would want your child to do that. So that's putting Eugenie to one side. But then with King Charles, there is a I guess, suggestion that the Telegraph, they're the ones that reported the story that you mentioned, Jess. There's a chance that the Telegraph are sensationalizing something more than they needed to, right? There's a suggestion that actually it's a couple of choirs, that are going to take part in the coronation that have these activist causes, right? And I sort of just shrug my shoulders at that. Were King Charles to start coming out and saying, yeah, absolutely, we should have open borders, let's invite everyone over in those small boats, even though, earlier today, I don't know if you saw the headlines, but earlier today, it actually was announced that a guy that came over actually was denied asylum in Norway. He arrived here when he was just 14. When he said he was 14, Jess, he wasn't. He was an adult. And he had used a Kalashnikov in Serbia to mow people down. And he came here, despite being an adult, and was put into foster care. So if King Charles started saying, well, yes, hunky-dory happy days, come one, come all to my kingdom, I think then I'd have a problem. But I think King Charles isn't quite in the Eugenie activist territory yet. But the royals are at risk of getting there. I mean, Her Majesty, our late Majesty, her Platinum Jubilee, the Platty Jubes, was, I think, tainted in all of this stuff, tainted in activism and all the rest of it, when it should have just been a celebration of this selfless woman. So I do worry that actually the death of the Queen has been the death of a quiet, composed, non-activist monarch and monarchy that, was not at risk of this kind of activist politicization that I'm afraid it's starting to dip its toes into. It needs to be really, really careful because, I can't put it strongly enough. There lies the path to madness.